The reason why I even made this video, I usually check this Nuclear Emergency Tracking Center once in a while, and when I came across this reading here, the current reading was 457 CPMs, which is very, very high, and the high was 552 CPMs on January 18th, 2017. Now, this is the west coast of the United States, which is taking the brunt. The west coast is taking the brunt of the radiation, but this is happening all over the country. This is why I'm so alarmed. January 18th, 2017, and this video is called Fukushima Fallout in USA in 2017. And that might be a pretty alarming title, but I believe it's still coming down. And here's my proof. It's coming from this place right here. Now remember, there were 3 full-out meltdown melt-throughs. And on this Nuclear Emergency Tracking Center, there's these radiation detectors that are spread throughout the United States, and they actually got them in Japan across this nuclear plant. And over here they have them as N is the number sieverts per hour. Now I could tell you I've been following this for a couple years already, and back in the day these used to be like 10,000, but also they're coming down. But also, they're not having the Geiger counters or radiation detectors in the middle of the plant where it used to be. Well, the reason why I think that it's still in dire straits over there is because if you look at these numbers in America, look at this radiation comes over here, and in fallout, when it rains, that's when you pick it up. And when I used to look at this years ago, there would only be a couple of these sites that were like above 100, and these little red symbols correspond here, but they don't really correspond, because I've seen this Radcon 5 at a lower reading than a Radcon 4, so take it for what it's worth. But back in the day, it'd be very rare to find these numbers that were over 100, and lately, like within the past month, these numbers are just like in the 200s, 300s, and 400s. Look at these numbers. 205 for Kentucky. Toledo always had some higher numbers. That's only 141. That's where the Davis-Besse power plant is. They actually have someone in Cleveland. It's saying 258. Perry's over here to the right of it. And if you go around here, you could do this yourself. That's a 208. Now there's a 32, which is kind of what it should be. But look at 243. And I'm not going to go through them all, but you're going to get the point here. There's Florida 170. Here's a red one right here at 263. Now, over 100, it's an alarming rate. Now I'm trying to figure out what the source of this radiation is, because look what I found. First of all, let's go over this radiation bit. Now, over here, non-ionizing radiation, it says over here that ionizing radiation has a higher frequency and a shorter wavelength than non-ionizing radiation. Has many uses, but it can be a health hazard. Now, exposure to it can cause burns, radiation sickness, cancer, and genetic damage. Now, over here, there's a definition, but this is the part that I'm trying to figure out, and maybe you nuclear shills can help me out. The light from the sun that reaches the earth is largely composed of non-ionizing radiation, since the ionizing far ultraviolet rays have been filtered out by the gases in the atmosphere, particularly oxygen. Now, what I'm trying to figure out is I don't think what I found here is radiation that's coming from the sun. And the reason why I say that is, check this out. Cesium-137. Cesium-137, or radiocesium, is a radioactive isotope of cesium which is formed as one of the more common fission products by the nuclear fission of uranium-235 and other fissionable isotopes in nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons. It is among the most problematic of the short to medium lifetime fission products because it moves easily and spreads in nature due to the high water solubility of cesium's most common chemical compounds, which are salts. Now, is this stuff going up and coming down in the water that's raining on us? I don't know, but that's my guess. What's yours? Now, it doesn't take a nuclear scientist to figure out that everything's a mess. This is no little cut on the finger. This is a full-fledged extinction-level event, nuclear holocaust. And it's all of us against an ideology that nuclear energy is clean, safe, green energy. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant was one of the largest nuclear power plants in the world. The problem was loss of grid electricity to run the pumps that bring in the cooling water. Now, how do you typically cool a reactor? The approach to cooling is very simple. You push water past the nuclear core to carry out heat somewhere else. The chain reaction that eventually runs the reactor can be shut off in a matter of seconds. What's left over in the core, the radioactive material, will continue to give off heat for a long time. Unless you have a mechanism to remove that, the heat can build up and can eventually damage the radioactive fuel or the reactor. Nuclear power plants use 2 to 4 circulating water pumps for each reactor unit. Each circulating water pump with its electric motor stands nearly 40 feet tall and supplies over 100,000 gallons of water. Now, as you could see by this picture of the lake, the image shows thermal discharge from the nuclear plant into the lake. The warm water discharged from the circulating water system enters the lake via a long canal and then cools as it flows counterclockwise around the lake, guided by a long wall. The cooled water, the dark part, is drawn back into the plant's intake structure for another cycle. Now, can you see how this is destroying the surrounding environments? Up to 50 cubic miles of highly radioactive water per year is pouring into the Pacific due to Fukushima. What and who should the public believe? TEPCO says 300 tons of radioactive water is entering the ocean from Fukushima. Do you believe that estimate? If not, what amount of radioactive water is leaking out of 3 broken open reactors? How much water is passing by 3 molten corium lava blobs underground, which then makes that water very highly radioactive? And where does it go? There is an underground river flowing beneath Fukushima, and the basements are all cracked up. Plus, these reactor building basements all have multiple gravel bottom tunnels leading to the ocean. For example, spent fuel pooling. San Onofre nuclear power plant closed in 2014 due to defective steam tubes and accelerating costs plus losses. The ocean water cooling system is still operating, but no longer to cool the plant's steam generators. Now it's only used to cool 2 pools that house the plant's spent nuclear fuels, which will stay in the pools for several years before being moved to dry cask storage. The system once pulled in more than 1 billion gallons of ocean water per day. Now it's down to 25 million gallons. The Fukushima Daiichi reactors are General Electric boiling water reactors of an early design supplied by General Electric, Toshiba, and Hitachi. Reactors 1 through 3 came into commercial operation in 1971 to 75. The fuel assemblies are 4 meters long. There are 400 in Unit 1, 548 in units 2 through 5, and 764 in unit 6. Now each assembly has 60 fuel rods containing uranium oxide fuel within zirconium alloy cladding. Unit 3 has a partial core of mixed oxide, MOX fuel, that contains plutonium. There are 32 MOX assemblies. Nuclear fission products are the atomic fragments left after a large atomic nucleus undergoes nuclear fission. Typically, a large nucleus, like that of uranium, fissions by splitting into two smaller nuclei, along with a few neutrons and the release of heat energy and gamma rays. The two smaller nuclei are the fission products. The fission products themselves are often unstable and radioactive. Many of the nuclides have a very short half-life and therefore are very radioactive. The radioactive decay actually produces hundreds of different nuclides. Now initially, the radioactivity level fades quickly, but it never fades out completely. A frequently voiced concern during the first weeks of the accident was regarding a fuel meltdown. This starts to occur if the fuel itself reaches 2500 degrees Celsius. At this point, the fuel rods slump within the assemblies. Conceivably, the corium, a mixture of the molten cladding, fuel, and structural steel, drops to the bottom of the reactor vessel. If the hot fuel or cladding is exposed to cooling water en route, it solidifies and fractures, falling to the bottom of the reactor vessel. Given that the melting point of the steel reactor vessel is about 1500 degrees Celsius, there's an obvious possibility on the corium penetrating the steel if it remains hot enough. The whole fuel melt scenario is much more probable with a sudden major loss of coolant when the reactor is at full power than in a Fukushima situation, at least beyond the first few days. Now here is a diagram that I even think a child will be able to understand. I'm going to show you how I think the Fukushima radiation is making its way to the United States in the fallout. Now, just read this about the water cycle. It says, you may think every drop of rain that falls from the sky or each glass of water that you drink is brand new, but it has always been here and it is part of the water cycle. Now, if this was Fukushima, this slide on the beach, imagine this is where the Fukushima nuclear power plants are. Fukushima was built at the bottom of these mountains and hills. Now the water flows downhill to the oceans on the top when it rains and below through aquifers underground. Now the reactors that are melted through where this ladder is and the water pouring through to the ocean mixing with these radionuclides, this is how it's getting into the water. Remember, thousands, hundreds of thousands of tons of this water is going in a day, and it's been leaking coming up to 6 years. Now this foamy white stuff here, imagine this is the contamination flowing mostly on top of the top parts of the ocean, and it's going to make its way down, but it's mostly, they say, on the top. It says that the cesium, the strontium, and the bad cancer-causing materials, that's getting into the ocean. That is a total fact. You can't dispute that. Now, the way it gets into the atmosphere is through evaporation. See how the water droplets are being brought up into the air, into the sky? Now, it pulls the stuff up, then it condenses. This condensation, it condenses in the atmosphere. Then it comes down as precipitation coming into from the clouds, poisoning our croplands, our fruit trees, our grasslands, our gardens, and our lawns that we play in. Eventually it makes its way back to the streams, following the path of least resistance. Now where does it end up? It goes back into the oceans, into the lakes, to start that cycle all over again. Now it makes it also into the groundwater, with these pollutants and actually makes a cycle of death caused by nuclear energy. Now, this is how I believe it's getting into the fallout from Japan. Thousands of miles away, this stuff is eventually making its way through the clouds. Now remember, they're burning radioactive disaster debris, and that's making it into the atmosphere also. Now it comes down on the mountains, it goes up through the sublimation, it melts down through snow melt, and it's seeping everywhere. It comes out in the springs. It's basically inundating the planet. Now when you're outside, it's also coming down on you in the rain. Now who still delivers all in this weather? The postmen and the people that work outside, the children that are playing in the picnic areas. So this is affecting everybody. So how is this stuff coming down on the United States? And I think this is where it's coming from. It's the bleeding of these nuclear materials is getting more intense since the accident. And that's why I think the radiation numbers are rising. These numbers reading over 100 CPMs or more, 200, 300, 400, they should be alarming. But since I don't think anybody is really paying attention to it, so it really doesn't matter. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Now, one last thing is plant uptake. Remember, cesium and strontium, they mimic calcium and potassium. They mimic this stuff. So our bodies and our plants actually think it might be other things, and they bring them up into the plant and store them in it. Same thing with our bodies. When we eat this stuff, it gets stored in our bones. And what does it cause? Cancer, plant cancers, human cancers, all kinds of cancers. That's the bottom line. Before you see the maps that I think proves this point. And my whole point is, fill me in. I don't think this radiation that's causing these high CPM levels is coming from this guy here, the sun. The sun that gives life, I do not think is the radiation that's coming and being recorded on those CPM maps and coming down with the rainfall. I don't think it's coming from the sun. I will bet it's coming from Fukushima. What do you think? Now imagine the corium that is buried in the ground is below the surface. The corium blew through the foundation at Fukushima, is lying in the soil. So now imagine all this groundwater that's being pushed past it is where the contamination also is flowing. Now, if you ever seen in the parking lot when it rains and you have the oil spots, just imagine what one drop of oil does. It creates a rainbow all over the parking spot. That's what's happening with this corium and all this contamination. It is flowing right past this water and is just mind-blowing the amount of contamination that's going on over there. About this, if it wasn't for this water, the aquifer underneath Fukushima, those cores would have burned right through the ground. It's only because of that stream flow, the aquifer, the groundwater flow underground, cooling those melted blobs. There would just be a big massive hole in the ground. Think about that one. Now here is the time lapse for the 18th. Notice where the rain is coming down. It's in the exact same spots where the highest levels of the radiation were recorded. Isn't this ironic? Now on this Nuclear Emergency Tracking Center, there's an animate button. And if you animate it, it's going to only give you the top readings for the past 24 hours. But if you look at where these readings are coming up. Notice they're coming up here, here, and here. See, there's a 302, 111, 339, 158, 274. This is where the highest readings are taking place on the 18th. Okay, now keep that in mind here. Now here's a side-by-side map with them next to each other. And it's actually almost like they are right exactly on top of each other. You don't have these highest levels of radiation coming around in any other areas where there's no precipitation coming down. Now, I think we better wake up real quick because the Earth is having a massive meltdown right now. And it's all because of this nuclear accident at Fukushima. Now, no one wants to bother thinking about this, but it's going to get a lot worse. And if we just stick our heads in the sand, whoa, boy, are we doomed.